All right, back to do UFC 216 predictions. A little bit of a different setup this time around. I've lowered the audio boost in my software equipment, and I've kind of moved some things around, so I'm kind of further from the computer fan. So hopefully that results in some level of audio improvement. Let me know in the comments. So let's talk about this card. This is a card that is lacking a really money main event because unfortunately Demetrious Johnson has never really been money against Ray, and Ray Borg is not a name that people are tremendously hyped on. Hardcores are, but not the casuals. And then Tony Ferguson, Kevin Lee kind of suffers from the same thing. It's a main event that's not a title fight. It's an interim title fight. But if you're hyped about Tony Ferguson, you're probably not hyped about Kevin Lee. He's kind of a little bit under the radar in terms of what you want to see for the lightweight belt. You want to see Ferguson Nurmagomedov. You want to see Nurmagomedov McGregor. You want to see Ferguson McGregor. Some combination of that trio. So to get anything else is a little bit disappointing. And there is one main card fight that I don't remotely understand why it's there. But we'll talk about that when we get there. We open up with Brad Tavares versus Thales Leitis. I'm going with Tavares in this one. These are two guys who've been around for so long that we know what we get here. Tavares is a guy who I don't think has really ever lived up to his potential, if I'm being entirely honest. He's a guy that at one point I really thought would be pretty good when he went on his run, beating Donkey Yang, Tom Watson, Ricky Fukuda, Bubba McDaniel, Lorenz Larkin, especially the Lorenz Larkin fight. I thought we'd finally found something here, and then he kind of fell off, and he's a guy who kind of beats himself. He doesn't really have a great overall sense of the fight, the overall fight IQ. He focuses on I kind of won that last punch, that last exchange, and therefore I'm fine when you've lost the round in reality and you're going to lose the fight. But Thales Leitis is a guy who doesn't pose a lot of problems for those ideas. He's a pretty powerful striker, actually. He's got, obviously, an excellent ground game, amazing grappler. And, a lot of positive things about him. Good cardio, very tough, very hard to finish. But he fights at a low clip, doesn't exactly overwhelm with volume, and kind of fights in a way that you just have to win exchanges against him. There's no bigger picture. You have to stuff some takedowns, which I think Tavares can do. So Brad Tavares by decision. Could be an ugly fight. John Moraga versus Magomed Bibulatov. Going with Bibulatov in this one because as much as I would like to see his hype train derailed, and I really would, because if you're not familiar with the situation in Chechnya, you should look that up, because Bibulatov is, along with a couple other fighters in the UFC, very much entrenched in a regime that's committing some horrible atrocities. But Moraga is a guy who thrives with top position, is not tremendously athletic at this point, very powerful still, but Bibulatov has, I think, the physical skills to combat him, and is a guy who's very hard to control on his back and very hard to get there. I think when you combine those things against Moraga, Bibulatov should be able to get this done. Walt Harris versus Mark Godbeer. Going with Walt Harris by first or second round TKO. He's, for a UFC heavyweight, very athletic. His problems are he doesn't have a very good chin. He's definitely knockoutable. But Godbeer, not the most powerful guy, and also not the most athletic guy. Really just don't see him being able to keep up with Harris, who's very powerful. Has a good knack for accuracy, to be honest, with his punches. And also, he can fight at a decent pace. And not bad on the technical aspects. For a guy who has no real combat sports background and kind of just went into MMA, he's put together a pretty nice little game. Pro Gonzalez versus Poliana Botello. I'm going with Pro Gonzalez, even though I think Botello has more upside. I think she's a bit more athletic. I think she's got actually a fair bit of power. But her game it's not put together yet. It has a lot of just pieces that need to be put together. And as much as Pro Gonzalez, you could say a very similar thing about she knows what she wants to do, and that is take you down, try to catch you and stuff. And Botello's the kind of aggressive person who I think will find herself in a choke or some bad spot. And Pearl Gonzalez will be able to get the finish. Bobby Green versus Lando Venata. Two guys that I think have almost the same problem, honestly. In Bobby Green's case, he is this classic slickster in a way. Very counter heavy. Does have a good clinch wrestling game. Used to have a good wrestling game just entirely, but it seems he's gone away from it, or age and some hardships in life have made it impossible for him to really maintain the appropriate training regimen. Maybe. Like, Bobby Green's had a legit rough life if you really want to do your homework about him. He's on a 3-fight losing streak. He's up against it here against Venata. Venata lost to David Tamer, and that was opening a lot of eyes that he's not going to just stroll through this division like we were hoping when he debuted against Tony Ferguson. We saw a little bit of that with the John McDessie fight, but the Tamer fight really, really brought it home. But, a reasonably hard to take down guy, very flashy stand-up, very athletic, tremendously athletic, good chin. A lot of what he's going to be weak against has got things like counter pressure and just people who are going to make him work for everything and make him not cut right through them. Bobby Green will make him work because Bobby Green's tough, but he doesn't apply pressure, and that's why I got to take Venata. That, and I have no idea where Bobby Green's head is at any point in his career right now, or his personal life, because, like I said, it's been such a rocky road. Then you also have to look at the fact that, training with Brandon Gibson and the Jackson 7 crew, there should be no way that Venata hasn't made some much-needed changes to his game coming into this fight. Matt Schnell versus Marco Beltran. I'm making a weird pick here because I feel Marco Beltran stylistically is a better fighter. I feel he is a better fighter, but cutting down to 125, he looks terrible. This is a case where just because you can make the cut doesn't mean you should do it. He looked tired, looked weak very early on in his last fight at 125. Schnell, has a bad chin for 125, which is saying something, because usually that's not something you say. I can't think of any other flyweight on the roster that statement applies to. But, offensively he's pretty good. His defense is not bad. I feel like he'll just last long enough for Beltran to start getting tired and weak, and then either win a decision, because he's not the most powerful of finishers, and Beltran mentally is very tough. But, I got to taking Schnell. I'll say it goes the distance, but I wouldn't be surprised by a stoppage. Main event of the undercard, Tom Duquesnoy versus Cody Stamann. Cody Stamann, actually a pretty promising prospect in his own right, but Duquesnoy is the prospect at bantamweight right now. Lightning, a lot of power in his hands and feet, great stoppage ability. Actually very good at stuffing level 1 takedowns and getting back to his feet. Stamann's wrestling, I don't think it's deep enough. Like, in MMA, I don't know about his wrestling background, because I assume he has one, being a Team Alpha Male guy. Is he with Team Alpha Male, or let me pull that up real quick. I think he's with Team Alpha Male. No, Michigan Top Team. Okay, so maybe it's just that he fights so much like an alpha male guy that I think he's with TAM. He's open to getting hit, doesn't have much of a counter game to him. His takedown is very one level. He's going to shoot, and that's what's going to take you down. Duquesnoy is actually pretty good at stopping that, and he's not the wrestler that Patrick Williams is. Because Patrick Williams is a very good wrestler. I think people lost in the chaos of the debut of Duquesnoy. People don't really know how good of a fighter or how potentially good Patrick Williams was if he just started a couple years earlier, like maybe 5 years earlier, and knew how to fight without gassing himself out. He'd be actually quite fantastic. But I'm going with Duquesnoy, first or second round TKO. Beneil Dariush versus Evan Dunham. This pains me because I really like Evan Dunham, but while his pace might be a problem for Dariush, because Dariush doesn't necessarily respond to heavy output or heavy volume very well, he is such a slow lightweight, Dunham. And Dariush is in kind of a similar boat, to be honest, but not to the same degree. And Dariush, better grappler. I see him just being able to win this fight on the ground or on the feet. and put another win in the column, which is a shame because I really like Evan Dunham. I've always been a big fan of him, but just a guy who physically isn't up to the UFC level. And then the weird fight for the main card, we've got Kalindra Faria versus Mara Romero Borello. I know this was supposed to be Andrea KGB Lee originally, who's a reasonably big name in women's MMA, but realistically speaking, I don't even know why her versus Faria would be on the main card either. I would have thought Duquesnoy Staman or Bobby Greenlando Venata would have been on this main card, or hell, even Talis Latest versus Brad Tavares, which is on the UFC Fight Pass, is I think a bigger deal than this, and so is Biblitov versus Moraga. So I don't know. I'm taking Faria, but honestly, neither of these girls really impresses me in any way. Faria, for how long she's been around and how many good fighters she's fought, hasn't really seemingly developed a deep technical game. She's just scrappy, very scrappy, and I respect that, but you think that she should be more at this point. And Borello has a lot of polishing to do. Like, she makes Pearl Gonzalez and Botello look almost like polished products, and that's not good. Faria by decision, but God only knows. Derek Lewis versus Fabricio Verdum. I want to pick Derek Lewis because Derek Lewis seems like a quality human being, and Verdum doesn't, with some of his homophobic and stuff and his links to Chechnya as well, with the Kadyrov regime. But I'm picking him to win this fight. I think at some point this fight ends up on the ground. I think that Derek Lewis, despite how effective he is as a boxer, is still a limited striker. And I see this ending up on the ground at some point, and Verdum being the amazing grappler that he is, getting on top position, either pounding him out because he doesn't know how to respond or submitting him. I'm going to go with the submission second round because I think you got to respect Lewis's power for at least a round. Lewis could absolutely knock him out. Like that's the caveat in heavyweight fights in general, but particularly Derek Lewis's fights, that there's enough power to get a knockout here. But I got to go with Verdum. Demetrious Johnson, Ray Borg. Demetrious Johnson. Ray Borg wants to do a lot of the same things that Demetrious Johnson wants to do, and isn't as good at them. This fight could happen down the road, say like a couple of years from now, and it might be more interesting because Borg has a ways to go in developing his game. But game is, doesn't necessarily have the striking to really expatiate Demetrious Johnson's weakest aspect, and doesn't have the wrestling, I think, to really get top positioned or, implement the game that he wants to play from top game and from back control. So, yeah, Demetrious Johnson, either by, I could see it go the distance, but I could also see Borg getting tired because we know historically he's had some rough weight cuts to 125. I could see him getting taken down, or at some point just getting a little bit tired, and Johnson exploiting that for a submission. So I'm going to go with that. Demetrious Johnson via like a rear naked choke. Tony Ferguson versus Kevin Lee. This is interesting. Ferguson's got the edge on the feet, and Kevin Lee's had some problems with that regard. Kevin Lee, really good wrestler. Ferguson, a very underrated wrestler, in my opinion. Should be able to nullify a lot of what Kevin Lee wants to do, but it's an exciting, interesting fight, even if I don't really see the path to victory for Kevin Lee. I don't see him knocking out Ferguson, who has a fantastic chin. I don't see him being able to impose his wrestling game enough on Ferguson, who is good at stopping takedowns and is very dangerous on the ground on his own right, even though Lee did deal with Michael Chiesa before this fight, so I'm not terribly worried about submission or anything. But Lee is still very catchable on the feet, and I think at some point Ferguson finds the button and turns him off for the TKO. And your interim championship, and presumably a fight with Conor McGregor. I say presumably because God knows what Conor McGregor is doing right now at this point. So there you go. That is all I've really got to say on this card. It's not bad. It's not bad. I think it's worth the money, and it's coming back from the Ovensei Pro Okami card, which was not very good. On paper, I'd say delivered a little bit more than expected, but I think this is. Yeah, I think that's basically all I've got really to say on the matter. So that's the fight card. Usual links down below, Twitter, etc. Link to the picks if you just want to do the quick picks thing. So let me know if the audio sounds any better. And we'll talk to you on the next card, which is Cerrone versus Till. Never really thought I'd be watching Darren Till in a main event at this point.